There's this thing nobody really talks about. Not because it's taboo, but because it's so close, so fundamental that most people never see it. We talk about being afraid of death, afraid of failure, afraid of rejection, of poverty, of loneliness, of pain. And sure, those fears are real. You feel them. They shape your choices. They keep you up at night. But they're not the deepest fear. They're not the root. There's something underneath all of them. Something so primal, so absolute, that every other fear is just a branch growing from this one twisted root. And the strange thing, once you see it, once you really understand what you've been afraid of this whole time, everything changes. Not because the fear disappears, but because you finally understand what you're actually dealing with. So, what is it? What's the fear beneath all fears? It's the fear of not existing, not death, not the fear of your body stopping, but the fear that the you that you think you are, might not be real, might not be solid, might not be what you've always believed. Stay with me here, because this gets deep fast. Think about what you do every single day. You wake up and immediately you start reinforcing who you are. You check your phone. Are people acknowledging you? You look in the mirror. Am I still here? You go to work, have conversations, post on social media, achieve things, buy things, create things. And underneath every single action, there's this quiet, desperate question. Am I real? Do I exist? Does anyone see me? That's not philosophical pondering. That's survival mode. Because somewhere deep down, you sense something terrifying. The person you think you are is actually just a story, a collection of thoughts, memories, beliefs, and reactions that you've been calling me for so long that you forgot it's not solid. It's like you've been living in a house made of paper, and you've spent your whole life pretending it's made of stone. And the deepest fear isn't that the house will be damaged. It's that someone or something will reveal that it was never solid to begin with. This is why rejection hurts so much. It's not just someone doesn't like me. It's if they don't see me the way I see myself, maybe I'm not real. This is why failure terrifies people. It's not just about losing money or status. It's if I'm not successful, if I'm not achieving, if I'm not becoming more, then who am I? What am I? This is why we're addicted to validation, to likes, to being seen, to being right, to being important, because every bit of external confirmation feels like proof. See? I exist. I'm real. I matter. But here's the thing that makes this fear so insidious. The more you try to prove you exist, the more fragile that existence becomes. Think about it. Someone who's truly confident, truly solid in themselves, they don't need constant validation. They don't need to prove themselves every 5 minutes. They don't collapse when criticized or rejected. But someone who's desperately trying to maintain their sense of self, they need everything. Every interaction becomes a test. Every moment becomes a potential threat to their existence. You know that feeling when someone criticizes you and your whole body tenses up? That's not just hurt feelings. That's existential panic. Because if their version of you is different from your version of you, one of those versions isn't real. And what if it's yours? This is the fear that drives almost everything humans do. We build empires, create art, start wars, fall in love, chase success, accumulate possessions, all in service of one desperate need: to prove we're real, to prove we exist, to prove we matter. And the exhausting part? It never works, because you can't prove you exist by doing more, by achieving more, by getting more people to see you. That's like trying to make a shadow solid by shining more light on it. The shadow isn't the problem. The problem is thinking the shadow is you. Most people never question this. They just keep building, keep achieving, keep trying to become more solid, more real, more undeniable. And they call it ambition, or drive, or self-improvement. But underneath, it's just fear. The deepest fear. The fear that if you stop performing, stop achieving, stop being who you think you need to be, you'll disappear. And here's what nobody tells you. You're right to be afraid. Because the person you think you are, that constructed self, that story you've been telling yourself your whole life, it's not solid. It never was. But that's not the terrifying part. That's actually the liberating part. By the way, our shared space of light and awareness is on its way to 100,000 people. Thank you to everyone who subscribes and brings this moment closer. The terrifying part is what you have to go through to realize it, because you can't understand this intellectually. You can't think your way to freedom from this fear. You have to actually experience the dissolution of everything you thought you were. And that's the journey most people spend their entire lives avoiding. They build thicker walls, stronger identities, more impressive achievements, better stories about who they are, and they call it growth. But it's not growth, it's fortification. It's building a bigger prison and calling it a palace. Because here's the truth. The deepest human fear isn't something you overcome by becoming stronger. It's something you overcome by becoming nothing. And that sounds terrifying, doesn't it? That sounds like death, like annihilation, like everything you've been afraid of. But what if it's not? What if that fear, that absolute terror of not existing, is actually pointing you towards something? What if the thing you're most afraid of is actually the doorway to freedom? So, if the deepest fear is the fear of not existing, of not being real, the obvious question is, why? Why are we so terrified of this? And the answer is both simple and mind-bending. Because we've mistaken ourselves for something we're not. Somewhere early in life, you learned to identify with your thoughts, with your body, with your story, with your name, your personality, your role in the world. And you started believing that's what you are. It's like your awareness itself, this infinite formless capacity to experience. But you've convinced yourself you're the character appearing in the experience. You're the space in which the movie plays, but you think you're the actor on screen. And once you make that mistake, once you identify with the character instead of the awareness, everything becomes about protecting that character, maintaining it, proving it's real. Because if you're the character, then any threat to the character is a threat to you. Any criticism of the character is an attack on your existence. Any moment when the character isn't seen, acknowledged, validated, that's a moment when you might not exist. This is why people get so defensive, why they can't handle criticism, why they need to be right, why they curate their social media like their life depends on it. Because in a very real sense, they believe it does. If the story falls apart, if the character is revealed as unreal, then what are they? And the mind can't conceive of existing without being something. So it creates this massive defense system, an entire life structure built around maintaining the illusion that you are this person, this body, this story. Think about your daily thoughts for a second. How many of them are actually about maintaining your sense of self? Did I say the right thing? What do they think of me? Am I successful enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I good enough? Do people like me? Am I doing this right? Am I falling behind? Am I better than them? Am I worse than them? Constant evaluation, constant comparison, constant reinforcement of this me that needs to be protected, improved, validated, and it's exhausting because it never ends. There's never a moment when the constructed self is finally safe, never a point where you can relax and stop defending your existence. Because deep down, you know the truth. You know that this self you're defending is actually fragile, actually constructed, actually not solid. And that knowing creates a constant background anxiety, a low-level terror that never completely goes away. Even when things are good, even when you're successful, even when people love you, there's this sense that it could all fall apart, that you could be revealed, that you could disappear. This is what drives addiction, not to substances, though that's one form. Addiction to achievement, to relationships, to being busy, to being needed, to being right, to being special, to being anything. Because every addiction is actually the same addiction, the addiction to feeling real, to feeling like you exist, to feeling like you matter. And whatever makes you feel that way, even temporarily, becomes something you can't live without. Some people get it from success, so they become workaholics, never satisfied, always chasing the next achievement. Because the moment they stop achieving, the moment they stop moving forward, they start to feel like they're disappearing. Some people get it from relationships, so they become dependent, needy, terrified of being alone. Because when they're alone, when no one's seeing them, reflecting them back to themselves, they start to dissolve. Some people get it from being right, from being smart, from being better than others, so they become argumentative, competitive, unable to admit mistakes. Because being wrong doesn't just mean they made an error, it means they're not who they thought they were. And some people get it from being victims, from suffering, from their problems. Because at least suffering proves you're here. At least pain is real. At least your problems give you an identity, a story, a reason to exist. That's why people unconsciously hold on to their trauma, their pain, their drama. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering is proof of existence. I hurt, therefore I am. This is the mechanism. This is how the fear operates. It creates your entire personality, your entire life strategy. Every choice you make is either running from this fear or trying to resolve it. And here's the cruel part. None of it works. None of the strategies actually make you feel real. They just temporarily quiet the fear. Success doesn't make you feel solid. It just gives you a brief hit of "I exist" before the fear returns, louder. Now I have to maintain this. Now I have more to lose. Love doesn't make you feel complete. It just makes you terrified of losing the person who makes you feel real. So you become clingy, controlling, afraid. Achievement doesn't satisfy the hunger. It just moves the goalpost. When I achieve this, then I'll finally be someone. Then I'll finally matter. But you achieve it, and the emptiness is still there. Because you're trying to make it go solid. You're trying to prove that a story is real. And it can't be done. No amount of external validation will ever make the constructed self feel truly solid. Because it's not solid. It never was. It's just a pattern of thought that you've been calling me. And the awareness of this, even if it's not conscious, creates a constant low-level anxiety. a sense that something's wrong, that something's missing, that you're not quite real. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fix this feeling, trying to finally feel solid, real, complete. And they never do, because they're trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem isn't that you're not real enough. The problem is that you think you are the story. You think you are the constructed self. And as long as you believe that, you'll spend your life trying to make a ghost solid. But what if you're not the ghost? What if you're the space in which the ghost appears? What if the fear of not existing is actually pointing you toward what you really are? So here's where it gets interesting. Because once you see the fear for what it is, this desperate attempt to make a story feel real, you're faced with a choice. You can keep playing the game, keep trying to build a more solid identity, keep achieving, performing, proving. Or you can do the thing that terrifies you most. You can let yourself not exist. Not physically. We're not talking about death. We're talking about letting the story die. Letting the constructed self dissolve. Stopping the constant effort to be someone. And this is where most people turn back, because it feels like annihilation. It feels like you're about to disappear into nothing. But here's what actually happens. When you stop trying to be someone, you discover what you actually are. You're not the story. You're not the character. You're not the thoughts about who you are. You're the awareness in which all of that appears. And awareness doesn't need to be validated. It doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need to achieve or accumulate or become. It just is, effortlessly, completely, always. Think about it. Right now, you're aware. You're experiencing these words, these thoughts, whatever feelings are present. And that awareness isn't something you have to create or maintain. It's just here. Always has been. Always will be. When you were a child, it was here. When you're old, it'll be here. When you succeed, when you fail, when people love you, when they don't. Awareness is always here, unchanged, unthreatened. That's what you actually are. Not the story about you, not the personality, not the achievements or failures or identities. Those are all just appearances in awareness, like clouds passing through the sky. And when you realize this, not intellectually, but actually see it, feel it, know it, the deepest fear dissolves, because you realize you can't not exist. Awareness is always here. You're always here. Not as a person, not as a story, but as this undeniable presence. And then everything changes. Not because you become someone new, but because you stop trying to be someone at all. You still have a personality. You still have preferences, relationships, goals. But they're not you. They're just things happening in you. Like weather passing through the sky. And when they're threatened, when you're criticized, rejected, when you fail, it still might hurt. But it doesn't threaten your existence, because you know what you actually are. And that can't be threatened. This is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from needing to be anything. You stop performing, stop proving, stop defending a self that was never solid to begin with. And the fascinating thing, people can feel it. When you're not trying to convince them of who you are, when you're not defending your existence, you become more real to them, not less. Because they're not interacting with a defensive story anymore. They're interacting with presence, with awareness, with what's actually here. So how do you get there? How do you overcome the deepest fear? Not by fighting it, not by becoming braver or stronger or more confident, but by investigating it, by turning toward it instead of running. When the fear comes, that feeling of not being real, of not mattering, of not existing, don't distract yourself. Don't immediately reach for validation or achievement or proof. Just stop and look. Who is it that's afraid of not existing? What is this I that fears it might not be real? And if you look closely enough, if you're willing to sit with the discomfort, you'll discover something shocking. You can't actually find it. You can find thoughts about yourself, feelings, memories, but you can't find the separate self that's supposedly afraid. There's just awareness, just presence, just this moment happening by itself. And the fear, it's not yours. It's just another appearance in awareness, another cloud in the sky. This isn't a one-time realization. It's a constant returning, a constant letting go of the need to be someone, a constant recognition of what you actually are. Some moments you'll remember. You'll rest as awareness, and everything will feel light, free, obvious. Other moments you'll forget. You'll get caught in the story again, defending your existence, trying to prove you're real. And that's okay. That's part of the process, because every time you see through the fear, every time you recognize what you actually are, it gets a little easier. The story loses its grip. The fear loses its power. And slowly, imperceptibly, you start living differently. Not because you're trying to, but because you're no longer motivated by the fear of not existing. You stop caring so much what people think, not because you've become arrogant, but because their opinion doesn't threaten what you are. You stop chasing achievement for achievement's sake, not because you become lazy, but because you're no longer trying to prove your existence through accomplishments. You stop defending yourself constantly, not because you let people walk over you, but because criticism doesn't feel like an existential threat. You become lighter, freer, more present. Not because you've become someone better, but because you've stopped trying to be someone at all. And paradoxically, that's when you become most yourself. Most authentic, most real. Not the constructed self, not the story, but the awareness that's always been here, witnessing everything, threatened by nothing. That's the journey. That's how you overcome the deepest fear. Not by making yourself more real, more solid, more undeniable, but by discovering what you actually are beneath all the stories. And what you are, that can't be threatened, can't be diminished, can't disappear. It's always been here. It's here right now. And it'll be here long after the story of you is forgotten. If this video shifted something in you, write in the comments, "I am what remains." Write it as your promise. Nobody